Urban Explorers, what's your scariest experience? There was an old feed mill near my house when I was a kid. It was an 11-story tall concrete tower on a large plot of paved land with a rusted fence around it. Looked like a castle. Everyone's parents told them to never go there. Which to kids is of course a challenge. In the beginning I jumped the fence a few times. And then couldn't resist trying to get into the actual building. The lock was massive but old, and eventually I managed to get it off. The inside was pitch black. So I got a few friends to go back with me. All of us had flashlights. We went up the stairs. What we thought would be cool would be to get on the roof and maybe put a flag up or something. As we climbed the dark stairs we noticed a certain humming noise. It grew louder as we went up. And then the first of us got stung. And we realized the horrible mistake we had made and ran like mad from the now very angry swarm of hornets that had built a nest a good 10 feet long in this abandoned concrete building. We were all stung a few dozen times, and it was really painful. My father just laughed and said I'd better listen next time. Not an urban explorer, but did geocache a lot, that app like a scavenger hunt, where you explore locations to find caches with small prizes. My friend and I had avoided visiting a nearby cache down by the creek because it was hard to reach. The cache was inside a large, long concrete underpass, and the creek trails end there. The path is full of thorny vines and dead trees. The next cache was about 7 miles away though, so one weekend we just wore jeans and thick gloves and went for it. Took forever to wade through thorns and trees, felt like I would walk into a cobweb with a giant spider any second. We made it to the underpass and it was unremarkable, lots of old graffiti and dripping wet concrete. Shuffled through rocks and dead leaves at the bottom of tree trunks to find the cache, no luck. Opened up the map again on my phone to confirm we were in the right spot when I heard laughter. It was a high-pitched giggle which turned into unhinged, uncontrolled laughing. The laughter echoed and reverberated because it came from inside the underpass. We exchanged a look and didn't know what to do. The underpass was a giant concrete structure that curved around the creek, so we couldn't see all the way in. We slowly started moving back through the path we came, and the hair stood on the back of my neck the entire time. It took about 5 minutes to get out of there onto the familiar paths again, but those minutes felt like hours. I kept expecting to feel a cold hand clamp down on my shoulder and drag me backward. Told the story before. There is a church surrounded by trees, long abandoned. It is across from a cemetery that is kind of elevated, so we could see the steeple, otherwise we would have no idea it was there. Decide to check it out. But the brush and trees are so dense we have to do this kind of spiral to get to the building. We find it has been boarded up. But there is side window board. Huge window nearly reaches the ground, and the board has fallen, and the glass is broken. Easy access. Inside it is church, pews are all knocked over on one side but not the other. It smells oddly like potatoes. The backside, where there are presumably rooms and such. We go that way. Turn the corner. And at the end of the short hallway there is a pile of fabric and with ribs and a long bone sticking up from under the fabric. Great. We found a body. Knowing better than to walk up any closer, we quickly leave. I look up the non-emergency number and call the police. I then get an argument with the dispatcher. She wants me to call 911, I tell her it's bones, not an emergency. We go round and round. Finally I hang up and call 911. Same goddamn dispatcher answers. I even snapped at her seriously. Cop shows up pretty quick, like 15 minutes. Rural area so odds are there is not much going on. He never questions why we were there or what we were doing, which is pretty cool of him. He looks down the hallway, and talks back and forth on his radio. We were made to stand the broken window. Finally he comes back. It's a deer, a little one. Looks like it busted in, got tangled in the curtains and died. He even said it had him going until he got close. He wasn't mad and told us he would rather go on 100 false alarms than to miss one real one. I went into an abandoned hospital at 2 to 3 a.m. by myself and couldn't find my way out. It was completely boarded up except for the only entrance, which was a hole somebody had cut out of the plywood that I had to squeeze through. I tried to keep track of where things were, but all of the rooms/hallways looked so alike that I lost track. It took maybe 10 to 15 minutes of running around until I finally found it. LOL. Not too scary, but that's my experience. That hospital has since been demolished. About 8 years ago, me, my ex, and his neighbor were exploring the Packard plant in Detroit. We started going in tunnels underneath where we were walking on large pipes because the water down there was about 6 inches deep. We got probably half a mile in and found a woman's body in the water. That was the first time I had seen a decomposing body. She was bloated, but her hair was still perfectly intact in her braids. Went into an old abandoned pub in my town, graffiti and shit everywhere, had to sneak in by climbing onto the second floor and going through the window, was with a few mates. We went downstairs, which was completely ruined, into the basement, which was a little stairway that led into a very very dark room which was decently wide, couldn't see anything, and then all we heard was a little screech and loud footsteps running towards us. Don't really need to say that we booked it out and never looked back, haha. Not sure if this counts precisely, but someone may find it interesting. Couple of years ago, some friends and I went up to an old military base that had been abandoned. By base, I mean 3 buildings, the main building, on the far left, the men's barracks in the middle, and the women's barracks on the right, maybe an eighth the size of the men's. We weren't there for urban exploring, we were there for ghost hunting. Had a chicken shit, superstitious friend who convinced us it was haunted, and we all liked ghosts, so we went. First time we went, the biggest experience I wasn't present for, but the 2 who were there swear by its authenticity. We had little audio recorder with us and we forgot it in the women's barracks. Me and chicken shit friend go to get the car while the other 2 go to get the recorder. When we meet back up, they're white as sheets. Apparently, when they were ducking back out the broken window with the recorder, something inside let loose a blood-curdling scream. They described it as incoherent rage. They didn't stop to investigate. The next time we went, the women's barracks was gone. The property had been purchased and they were demolishing it, so we snuck in for a go at the men's before it went down. Pretty boring, as I recall. Borrowed a FLIR camera from a friend, which we got some neat/creepy pictures with. For me, personally, this was the coup de grace. We're outside the building, walking parallel to it as we're leaving. I'm flicking my light casually across the side of the building and peering in the windows. Toward the front of the building, I glance up toward the 3rd floor. This I can still picture clear as fucking day. There's a man, skin chalk white, wearing a dark blue uniform, sitting in the windowsill, his back to me. He was sitting unnaturally still. Then, he turned and glanced over his left shoulder at me. I could only tell because I could suddenly see the bill of his hat and the ridge of his nose. Looking back, I can't remember him actually turning. He was just suddenly looking at me, minus the abruptness that implies. After maybe a full second or so, my vision got sort of blurry. It's hard to explain. It's like when you try to see in the morning when you still have sleep in your eyes. Blinked a few times, and he was gone. Turned to a friend and he said he'd seen a bit of him before he disappeared. Shit gives me goosebumps just writing it. Edit, fun story about the main building, the only one I never entered. One of the guys who I went with managed to find a way in through a broken window. He and whoever was with him explored for a bit, but then they came to a big, open room. It's got an honest to fucking god pentagram spray painting on the floor. Satanic imagery everywhere on the walls. They're frozen, when a guy, wearing a long black robe, walks into the room. He's as surprised to see them and they, him. Turns out, he and a friend were doing a Satanist photo shoot for some magazine or other and they'd stepped out for a smoke. They ended up sticking around and helping with the photos, I think. Good times. I was in the basement of an abandoned factory once with a friend and it was pitch black of course and all we had were tiny flashlights and it's scary enough, but then we heard clicking sounds and my friend's flashlight hit something moving and then greenish glowing eyes, then more eyes and then they all started coming towards us fast and a mother dog and probably 3 or 4 puppies ran past us into the darkness. For a second there it was the most sacred I ever had been. Old downtown area of a city down in Mexico. Me and my cousin decided to go and explore the abandoned municipal building. Place was made of stone so when we were walking around it was hella echoey. So we're walking and at one point we decided to split. He goes off somewhere and I find a tunnel that goes underground towards some archives. So I'm in this loud echoey basement that's dark, I hear every step, and I can hear my cousin walking upstairs. The basement was like a long tunnel, and I was using my flashlight since it was pitch dark. That's when I see a shadow of a person just standing still, I freeze on the spot. I was fucking terrified because I hear my cousin moving around. This person definitely heard us, and we should have heard him. He's still standing there, just looking at me. It's hard to see him because of my flashlight. I start to say hello, and that I didn't know there was someone in here and I start backing away getting ready to run. That's when my brain makes a connection. The shadow remains in the same spot without it moving from my flashlight changing direction. So instead I start to go forward until I hit the wall. Some asshole/s decides to paint the silhouette of a person, to scare the living shit out of people exploring the building. Touche you bastards. Not scary spooky but scary for his life. My roommate and I did a lot of urbex a few years ago. One time he and one of his buddy were exploring an abandoned beer factory in winter and on one of the parts the roof was missing, so there was ice on the floor. He didn't see that and he slipped and fell. The impact broke the floor and made him go right through. He fell 2 stories down, he broke one leg and a lot of ribs. Now since he was technically trespassing he was too afraid to call an ambulance there so he got his mate to carry him out to the car and drive him to the hospital, which made his injuries even worse. Luckily he made a full recovery, but he spent the next 2 weeks after that very loudly moaning in pain day and night. We both pretty much swore off urbex after that. Trigger warning, this account of my trip is about an almost rape of a child which I stopped, just a little heads up. Edit, the girl's name isn't actually Julie, I put that as to not use her real name, forgot to add that. Edit 2, fixed one of the timestamps in my comment. Edit 3, oh my god. Thank you for platinum. That's awesome and I super appreciate it, laughing face. I used to be an urban explorer, but then I just ran out of places to explore around B and was having to drive upwards of an hour to get to a place. That said, the Brooksbury Brick Factory, I went at night to test out my new flashlight which I had just bought, thinking that because it's just the ruins of a place and not actually a dark scary at night building it would be fine. Now this new light I got wasn't cheap and had 710 lumens behind it so I wasn't worried about not being able to see. When I got there it started out pretty normal. I parked on the roadside and got my bag which has my 7-sheath knife, a Clif Bar in case I get hungry, bottle of water, band-aids, an extra set of batteries etc., just the normal things in an explore bag. I was looking around with the light, seeing the famed colorful graffiti that I had heard so much about which looked awesome BTW. There are 2 long tunnels which I have no idea where they incorporated into the building when it was still standing, and it has an underfloor. It's like a half a story high and goes under what I assume used to be the upper factory floor. The wild set of ruins is really confusing to look at if we're trying to piece together what it used to look like. Now this is the last time that I had ever gone to a place at night because of what happened. Also keep in mind, this place is intrinsically in the middle of the woods. It's like 500 feet away from a 2-lane road, but the road is seldom traveled even in the daytime. Then I heard a loud engine coming up one of the dirt roads that leads off into the woods, then I saw the lights of an ATV sweeping over the trees and brush, so I douse my light and hide in the cavity which leads to the underfloor. It's a guy and a girl. The guy was probably around 18 to 19 and the girl looked like she was around 13 to 14. It seemed like they were just checking the place out. So I was thinking about turning my light back on to continue my exploration. But then there seemed to be a shift in how they were talking to each other. Then the guy raised his voice and I could clearly hear him say, "Well, I don't fucking care that you're 13, I want to fuck you," followed by the girl panicked saying, "I'll scream so please don't." Then the guy saying, "Julie, it's 10 p.m. at a place in the middle of the fucking woods, who's gonna hear you?" By now the girl's shirt was halfway up. So at this point I too am really afraid because of what was transpiring before my eyes. So I quietly pull out the knife, turn on the light and leap out of my hiding place with the light at his eyes and the knife drawn and say, "I'm here so you can piss off." I said this and it came out way more aggressively than I imagined it in my head, which worked in my favor. I took the light down and with him still blinded by my literal handheld car headlight and gave the guy a shove and put the spine of the knife against the side of his neck and said, "You're still here so fuck off." The guy scrambled to get back to his ATV and he drove off back into the woods very quickly. After this I was still on an adrenaline high, my hands are shaking even as I write this story down. I calmed the girl down and offered to drive her home as it was getting late and cold. My watch at this time said 10:30. She was obviously really upset and shaken even after I calmed her down, so I could use her name and so she could know mine. I asked her what her name was even though the guy said it before, so I didn't seem creepy and so she could know my name and the exchange of information would be natural, if you will. I offered to drive her home and that my car was just over there at the road. She shook her head yes. I asked her if she would like some water and handed her the bottle from my bag and she drank the whole thing. On the whole way to my car she was holding my hand and on the whole 10-minute drive back to her house, her address I was barely able to get out of her, she was just staring out the window. I cannot even begin to put into words how thankful her parents were when I pulled up to their house with their daughter. They apparently knew because the guy was her older brother. I don't really know much about what happened after that. I left to head home. Me and a few friends slipped through a hole in the fence of the haunted house that every little town has. Legend went that the big mining boss lived there, went crazy and killed his family. I researched it but came up with nothing. Just after midnight we creep in. Go around the back to find it's not one house, but kinda like a little courtyard with smaller buildings surrounding it. Looked through a broken window and it looked like someone had started renovations not long ago. Plaster kit in the floor, white paint on walls and a fluorescent light installed. The rest of the place was old, maybe 1930s, rotted brick, flaking paint and boarded up windows for context. We saw another broken window across the yard and shined a light at it to see huge scorch/burn marks across the outside wall. Walk to the broken window and it's a completely opposite of the first room. Smashed windows, shadows across the walls, ceiling, and strange lumpy shapes on the floor, as if the place was ransacked. Shone a light in briefly and the light holder pulled away instantly and said, "Fuck this, I'm leaving." We all saw the burnt room, splattered with what looked like dried blood everywhere, upturned old furniture with the words "They didn't catch me," or something similarly foreboding, scratched across the wall. We decided to leave and just chilled out at an abandoned train yard and drank until we got too cold and went home. A friend and I were visiting an old crumbly hospital in the area. The campus is fairly large and we started in one of the older buildings. I prefer to start at the top floor and work my way down, so that's precisely what we did. The top floor is a little worse for wear, there are prominent holes in the ceiling and floors. In the main hallway, I was stepping around a rather large hole, and touched the wall on my right for balance. Despite how lightly I touched the wall, it came crashing down on top of me, as well as a large portion of the ceiling. I stepped forward as quickly as I could, but my foot got caught in the floor and sunk through. My friend helped dislodge me, and I'm lucky I left with just a few scrapes and bruises. Word of advice, never go exploring alone. I used to live on the same street as two of my cousins. There was a church right down the road and it had always been quite creepy even though it was still in use. One day me and my cousins discovered that there was a little apartment underneath the church stairs. We peeked through the window and there was a Christmas tree and presents in the living room. Everything was dusty. It was weird because it was May at the time, nowhere near Christmas. We asked a little old lady who lived next door to me and she said that it was abandoned. The door was painted green and rotting. We creeped inside the house and wandered about a bit. There was broken glass everywhere. It looked like a tornado had swooshed in moments before our arrival, but everything was coated in dust. We peered into a bedroom. There was a dead pig lying on the bed. We thought it was a toy or something, but it stank and it was fleshy when we poked it with a stick. We heard footsteps coming towards the room and a female voice saying, "Piggy, Piggy, Piggy." We legged it after that. We never saw who said it, but no way am I going back there anytime soon. Found an old bunker from WW2, ruined and dirty both from outside and inside. We, me and two of the friends, explored it whole except one huge steel door. There was a deadly stench coming from the other side. On that door it said in white paint, "Here lie the traitors to the motherland, may they never find peace, for a betrayer is doomed never to rest. Do not open this door." Since the door were fused shut, we had no means of opening, so we called on local authorities to report finding a WW2 bunker, routine procedure in Eastern Europe, due to danger being present from potential mines. Officers took our report, ensured we didn't take anything. We found couple of shell casings and old granates in a box, and dropped us home. 3 days after, local news reported finding a mass grave, CCA 150 corpses, all stuffed in a medium-sized room, some half-decayed, some still in uniforms, some naked, some burnt, some sliced throat. We knew they killed someone and fused them in there, but to find that amount of corpses, with only a steel door separating 3 young boys and a 60-plus-year mass grave. That thought still gives me chills, even 10 years after. TLDR, found a mass grave from WW2. Had no idea how horrifying the truth really is. I know this is an old thread so it'll probably get buried, but I may respond anyways. Me and my friend love exploring abandoned buildings, and there's one in particular in my city that is easy to get into and has no cameras or anything. We used to frequent this spot to hang out since it was pretty private, and occasionally we would run into other people, but they were usually photographers or people shooting music videos. One time as we were heading up the different stories, we made it to floor 3 and stepped out of the stairwell to look around, and saw 3 women, mid/late 20s, suited up with respirators, gloves, and goggles. They were gathered around a makeshift workstation, presumably cooking meth. We smiled and waved, and I said something along the lines of, "Hey, sorry, we're just fucking around, well, stay off this floor and leave you guys alone." They smiled and waved and we both went on our way. On our way out an hour or so later they were gone and the workstation was too. They must have packed everything up, scattered the tables and carts around the floor and bailed. It was pretty unsettling. That same trip we also took some pictures since I had just bought a new camera, which had a burst function that could take 15 pictures a second. At one point I took a burst of some standing water with a reflection of some graffiti BC. I thought it looked cool, and didn't realize until I was going through the photos at home that one of the burst was different. I had taken about 7 to 8 in the burst in about half a second, and one photo in the middle had completely different graffiti. Not like a shadow moved over it, the entire art was different. The picture before and after it were exactly the same. I still have no explanation for this and we didn't go back to the building for a long time afterwards.